So we left off with our app running in the terminal. Now we're going to look at the three different files that are used to create this initial application. So the first thing we are going to do is we actually don't need to run our app inside of this separate terminal window. WebStorm has a built-in terminal window that we can open. So I'm going to kill the current process. See how it says app running at localhost 3000? Well, currently I can't open another terminal window and type in Meteor because we're running the app right here. You can't run two apps on port 3000. So if I want to quit the current Meteor that's running when I have a terminal open like this, you'll want to press Control-C to kill it. That's the same command on Windows and Mac. So now we want to open the folder that contains our app with WebStorm. So I'm going to open WebStorm, and I'm doing it on another screen, but all I'm clicking is, here we go. So you might be at a different menu than this. This is, if you already have WebStorm, it'll look like this. You already have a project open. If you don't though, you might see a smaller window, but there's the same thing. You want to go to the open button. So here we're going to go File, Open. And we want to open our app. Our app is just a folder. So let me go to, where is this project again? Example Meteor. So I'll go to Example Meteor under Projects, choose. And I'll just go ahead and open that up in this window. And here we go. Excellent. So in our project, I wonder if I can zoom in a little bit. All right. So inside of our project here on the left, if we look inside of it, we'll see four different items. The first one is this .meteor folder. That has a bunch of code related to building our application, and it's just doing a bunch of stuff behind the scenes for us, and we don't want to ever touch this folder really. The next file we see is a .css file. Then we have an HTML file and a JavaScript file. Meteor doesn't care where we put our files. So if we put any HTML, CSS, or JavaScript file anywhere in the app, it will just include that in the final app that we build. So those are the three file types that you will use while creating a Meteor application. We'll have our CSS file if we want to override Bootstrap styles or make custom appearances to our application, maybe put in animations. HTML dictates, which buttons, what divs, what the HTML is of our app, and then the JavaScript will contain all of our Meteor code. So now if I open the CSS file, you'll see that it's empty. There is no default CSS loaded into Meteor, and normally this is where we'd load Bootstrap, but I'll cover that in a different video. Now let me open the HTML file, and let's take a look at this. Let me blow this up. Oh, wrong button. Okay. So here we've got this head HTML tag. In any HTML file you create in Meteor, the head tag across all files will be combined. So if we use this tag in other places, it'll just be added to what is currently here. So this is something you'll normally have in your app, but strictly speaking, we actually don't need it for our starting application. So I'll just go ahead and get rid of that so it's not confusing. Then we have our body tag. In this case, let's think of the body as the main page of our application. And now you'll notice within our normal HTML, we have these curly braces. We have it right here, and we have it right here. This is a template language called spacebars. Whenever you see spacebars in your HTML, that means that there is a dynamic component to your HTML. So in this case, Counter refers to something dynamic, meaning that it will change at some point based off our code, and we're showing that in HTML. And this right here, this is a yield, which is a dynamic inclusion of the template named hello, which as a matter of fact is just declared right here. So you can read the yield spacebars line right here as basically just taking this block of HTML and putting it in that spot. So that's what spacebars does. Now, there are many times when we are going to want information from our code to go into our HTML. So to do that, if we want to have that flow, let me pull this open here. So we want to try to go from our code into our HTML. That's the direction we're going in. To do this, we will use something called helpers. Helpers are a set of functions that return values into our HTML. So let's go ahead and open our JavaScript file. I'm just going to go ahead and split the window here so we can see both files at once. Oh, that text is a little too big now, so a second while I get my windows organized. Okay, there we go. So this is our default app code right here. Now the first thing that we're trying to do, we want to get something into our HTML. So in order to demonstrate this concept, I'm actually going to delete all of the boilerplate code in our Meteor application. And we're just going to rebuild. We're going to still do the default project, but I'm going to rebuild it from scratch. So whenever we make a Meteor app, the first thing we need to do is start with a template. A template, again, is a block of HTML code. So we'll make our template name. Let's call this template hello. And let's put an H1 tag in there, and we'll say, this is my template. No, actually, let's say, this is the hello template. Now, if we want that to show on our page, we'll put our body tag up. And now we need to dynamically include the hello template. So we're going to take this piece of HTML and we want to dynamically include it here. So I'll use some space bars. Hello. All right. Now, if I want to run my app, remember, we closed our app from running in our previous terminal window. So if I want to start it, I need to open up a new terminal. One nice thing about WebStorm is that if you open up the terminal at the very bottom of WebStorm in the bottom left, it will automatically open up a terminal window where your path is set to the current working directory of your of your project. So if I do pwd, there's my current path. So now if I want to run the app, I'm just going to type Meteor. And now that it started that, here's our app. So it just loaded the body, which pulled in the hello template, which had an H1 tag. It says this is the hello template. Cool. We don't even need to write any HTML. But now, let's say I want to put in something dynamic, a number. So here I'll say, well, even more than that, we want to add a button to our template. And every time the button's pressed, we want to show how many times that button has been clicked in our HTML. So the first thing I'll do is make a button tag. I'll just put some text here that says click me. And while your app is running, if you hit Control S and just save your current file, it will automatically restart on you. Cool. So here's my button, click me. And then beneath that, put an H2, and we will say, you've clicked the button count times. So this will be dynamic. Now, if we go look at our app, you'll notice it just says you clicked the button time. It didn't include the count dynamic part. That's because we haven't defined the helper yet. So we're going to need to create a count helper on the hello template if we want to get information from our code to go into our HTML. So I'll come over here in the right window and work on the JavaScript. So the first thing I need to do is, well, we need to check that we are on the client. We have to be on the client because there isn't really any template or HTML that exists on the server. We are loaded in the user's browser in this case. So to check for that, I'll do if Meteor is client. And now, inside this if statement, we can create our count helper. So the syntax for that is template dot. And now the next thing I'll type is the name of the template we want to access. In this case, the hello template. So template.hello. Now to define the helpers, we'll say .helpers. And this is going to be a function call. You can see by the parens right here. And we'll pass into it as a parameter an object. So here we're passing in an object. It's still empty in this case. And now I'm going to put my cursor between the two braces on the object and hit enter. And it should automatically format this correctly. And we do need to put a semicolon down there. Now, any fields I defined on the object will be names for helper functions. So in this case, we want to create a count helper function. So I type count, I put a colon, then I'll just define a function. So we'll just put function, do the curly braces, hit enter. And here, the function is going to return whatever value I want to dynamically show in the spot of count. So I'll say return 0. Oops. Let me open our app. Here we go. And now it says you click the button 0 times because we're returning 0. And if we switch this to return 1 and our app restarts, you see you click the button 1 time. Cool. So we can now obviously get something to go from our code into our HTML, but we need something to happen for when we click on the button. Basically what we want to do is we want to go from our HTML and then call a function on our code. Those are called events. Events are triggered when a user interacts with our HTML, which tells code, specifically functions, to run. So I'll go ahead and show you. So if we want to listen to the click button event, it's going to look kind of like the helpers syntax. So right below the helpers here, I'll go ahead and define this. So we say template.hello.events now. It's a function call, as you can see. We're also going to pass in an object of functions into it. So I'll hit enter, put our semicolon in. And from here, I want to select the button click event. That's the event I want to listen to. So it's going to look kind of like how we defined our count variable, but instead of using a word like count, since we're going to be using a event selector, it's going to be a string instead. So in this case, we're listening to the click button event. Then we'll put a colon and define our function. So notice how this block of code looks a lot like this block of code, but the difference is that we're using a string as the name of the event here, whereas for our helpers, we just use normal object fields. So here we have click button, and then there's a function. Oops. So now I want to do something to Now I want to change the count specifically when the button is clicked. So this is obviously just returning 1 right now. So we need this to be some sort of variable. So I need to be able to change a variable in this function right here, and then have that variable be returned in this function up here so that this value will change. So imagining we could do this with just a normal variable, say like var x equals 0, we would return x, and then in the click button event, I'd say x equals x plus 1. So theoretically, we would trigger an event on our HTML, it would call some code, which would change the value of x, and then because x would change, that would call our helper code, which would put a value back into our HTML. And now if we go to our app, you'll notice that it's not working. That's because X is not a reactive data source. We need to create a piece of reactive data if we want to be able to create this binding between the event and the helpers. So I know that was a lot, and I'm going to go into reactive data separately in another video. So let's just go back and pretend like we don't have X right now. I'll delete it in here. Let's go back to returning 1, and I'll delete the code inside of our click button event. So now, we'll just, to recap what we learned in this video at least, if we want code to show something in our HTML, we need to create a helper function. In this case, count is mapping to count over here in the HTML. If we want an event on our HTML, say an HTML event, and while we're at it, we'll add, say up here, we'll go from code, we'll start to build this out a little bit more. We'll say helper function changes something on the HTML space bars. And then the other direction, we have an HTML event that calls an event function. So I'm going to go through this one more time. If we want code to go into our HTML, we create a helper, and then that will dynamically change the values wherever you see spacebars. If we want to have a function run when an HTML event occurs, we really don't need to change anything in our HTML. We just have to go to our code, and we have to follow the event syntax and select which event we need to listen to. Now in the next video, I'll talk about how to connect these two pieces to one another with a reactive data source.